If you want to master the way you walk, you must master the use of hip power. In this video, you will learn how to use your hips correctly walking on level ground, stairs, and hills. I'm not just talking about hip strength, I'm talking about knowledge. How do you use your hips in a way that will ensure you have the correct source of power to keep your posture and alignment correct and reduce stress on your joints? Most people get this terribly wrong. And I'm going to show you in this video how you can gain the knowledge you need to make the hips move you in a correct fashion all of the time, not just by accident. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Todd Martin, creator of the Walking Code. Let's go ahead and get started. There are two primary things that people get wrong when it comes to how they use their hip power. First is going to be which hip is creating the power, and the second is going to be whether you're powering from the front of your hips, which is the hip flexors, or the back of the hips, which is your hip extensors, primarily the glutes. Let's look first at which hip is creating the power. It's important to understand this because we don't use both hips to create power at the same time. We're using one or the other. Whether we're walking on flat ground, walking up or downhill, or walking up or down stairs. If we use the incorrect hip, it's going to create all kinds of posture issues like leaning forward, especially when people walk upstairs or walk uphill, or it's going to create duck foot walking where people walk with their feet turned out. That is primarily a problem of using the incorrect hip power. When we're walking on level ground, we are using the rear leg hip to power us until we get to the position where the knee is over the ankle. From this point, we're using the standing leg hip to create the swing through of the step. Now, some people, because the swing leg is moving forward, if they think about it at all, think that they are flexing the swing leg hip, using the swing leg hip power to move that leg forward, and that creates a significant problem. So what we have to understand is we're using the rear hip to this point. Now we're using the forward hip to create the swing through. And then when we place the heel, we're still using the same hip, my left hip, all the way up until we get to this position, and then we're going to switch again, now to the right hip, creating the power. So we're alternating left, right, as we walk. And it's going to create a smoothness of the walk because what you'll notice is if I'm powering from my standing leg hip as I create the swing through, I don't have to change anything up until this point. It was the same hip power. The only thing I'm changing is the rotation of my core waist muscles. And that's why this is tricky, because you can't see the rotation of the core waist muscles. So people mistakenly think that the hips are doing all the work, when in fact, rotation of the waist is an essential part of every movement. So when I am standing in this position, I'm powering by pulling forward from the front of my left hip. At this point, I'm powering from flexion of the right hip. And here I'm going to power from the left hip. And then I'm going to rotate my upper waist to place the heel. And I'm going to use the lower abs to tuck under to shift the weight to the new leg. As I do that, the hip power hasn't changed. What I've changed is the upper waist rotation and then the lower waist rotation. And then, and only then, do I change the hip power now to the new standing leg to swing through. Now, why is there an optical illusion going on with the hip power? It's because of the hip rotation, which we don't really appreciate with our eyes. When the leg swings forward, we can think of that as throwing your leg forward like this, but that actually does not work if your feet are facing forward. In your forward weight shift, if I do this towards the camera, and then I try to throw my swing leg forward, that's going to be the result. It's not going to move the body. We have to change the hip. What we're actually doing when we swing forward is creating that motion through rotation of our pelvis. That's created by our lower ab muscles. My lower abs on the left are turning around to the left and rotating the pelvis. And at the same time, I'm doing counter rotation with my upper waist muscles, which then keep me facing forward. And that's why when I'm stepping forward with my right leg, the left arm is going to be forward, because we have two simultaneous rotations going on: counterclockwise rotation from the lower abs and clockwise rotation from the upper abs, getting me to this position. Not flexion of the rear leg hip, or my right hip. So I rotate the lower abs and the upper abs, and that is what brings me into this position when accompanied by powering from my left hip. The swing through is a rotational action, not a forward flexion. From the side view, from this position, I'm going to power from my left hip, not swinging the right hip forward. And it's the rotation caused by the hip and the upper waist muscles and lower abs that create the swing through. Then I'm going to place the heel on the ground by reversing the upper waist rotation, and then reversing the lower waist rotation, I'm going to shift the weight forward. So now my weight is all on my right foot, and my pelvis is starting to rotate around to the right because of that lower ab rotation. When I then add in the power from my right hip, it pulls the body around, or the pelvis around, and the swing leg around. Again, I keep facing forward by rotating the upper waist in the opposite direction. From here, I'm going to power from my right hip, turn the upper waist forward and to the left, and turn the lower abs back and to the right. That's what brings me to this position, and then we reverse all three actions. When we walk in that manner, it allows us to create a very vertical posture and low impact on the joints, because we're not relying on gravity, trying to lean forward and push off with the glutes, which is a common mistake. Pushing off with the glutes that way causes us to tilt forward, even subtly, and crash into the heel, creating a very heavy heel impact that reverberates up all of our joints and into our spine, and creates additional stress and potential for damage and pain. So watch again, as I'm using rotation, there's no momentum at the end of the swing through. I'm just going to gently bring the heel down by turning the waist, turning the waist. If I turn the waist slowly, the heel is going to come down slow, and I'm going to move slow. If I turn the waist faster, I'm going to move faster, but not with heavier impact. So I'm not relying on leaning or gravity. Before we get started on the hip power for going upstairs and uphill, I want to explain a few of the problems people get into when using the hips on level ground. First is going to be the issue of pushing from the glutes. This is one of the most common confusion points that most people have when they ask me questions, because I refer to the use of the front of the hip pulling us forward into the swing through. And that is counterintuitive to most people who think we should be pushing off with our glutes. Here is what happens. When we walk, if we're walking with correct posture, we shift our weight and then we need to pull ourselves forward with the front muscles in the hip flexors. That is what gets us to this position. If I was using my glutes at this point, meaning the gluteus maximus pushing back against the ground, this is what would happen if I were to use the glutes. The glutes would posteriorly rotate my pelvis, not get the body to move forward. So that is hip flexors, that is glutes. That doesn't get the body moving forward. What happens when people try to use the glutes is they push off and lean and land and then collect themselves and then push and crash and lean and land, and you get a successive crash recover sort of gait instead of this sort of smooth gait here. That is one of the challenges, and I'm going to give you an exercise when we get on the stairs that is really going to help you clarify the difference between pushing from the back of the hip and pulling from the front of the hip. And I do want to briefly distinguish that whole issue from the use of your gluteus medius, which is the muscle on the back side of your butt. That muscle helps to maintain our alignment of our pelvis so it doesn't tip over this way when we're walking. It keeps our balance in single leg stance. That muscle here is not pushing off the ground, it's controlling the lateral tilt of the pelvis. And if you think about squeezing your glutes, or people tell you to feel your glutes, when you're walking, what you're feeling generally is the gluteus medius that is stabilizing the pelvis in single leg stance. It's not your gluteus maximus that you're feeling pushing off the ground. Now, the other most common problem people have with misusing their hips is trying to throw their swing leg forward when they are walking, using the hip flexors of the swing leg, not the hip flexors of the standing leg. When we do that, as I already demonstrated, if you try to throw your swing leg forward, it doesn't make the body go anywhere unless we create this improper posture where the feet are both facing out. Then people can throw their swing leg forward using the wrong hip, but it keeps a continuous misalignment of our spine and the use of the lower abs, and misaligns the feet so they're not facing in the direction of travel, and that's going to cause stress on the inside of the knees and on the inside of the feet, collapsing the arch more than it should be collapsing, and also stressing the inside of the hip joint as we roll over the body weight on the inside of all of these joints. So what we want to do is keep the feet facing forward, and that does require using the front muscles of the standing leg hip, because using the swing leg hip doesn't work unless we do that. And so now we're walking with duck feet, feet turned out at an angle. That's going to cause a problem. Now let's jump over and get into walking upstairs and how to use the hip power there. For those of you who are dead set on using your glutes, the stairs are the right place to use them. That and also walking uphill. So we're going to learn how to use the glutes properly when walking upstairs, because it is also a little bit more complicated than it seems at first glance, which is why so many people lean forward when walking upstairs or walking uphill. Before we jump right into that though, I do want you to know that this is a rather long video because I'm trying to give you a lot of information in one place. You don't have to feel like you need to watch the entire video at one time, but please come back because this is essentially one-stop shop for learning how to use your hips. But for those who are interested in my entire arsenal of information for how to walk properly and keep proper posture, I do recommend supporting the channel by jumping over to my website and signing up for the Tai Chi Code Walking Code Bundle. That includes all of my past YouTube videos organized in a clear format so you can access them easily, and the previous walking code courses and the Tai Chi Code course, all for just $10 a month. That is an amazing value, and for those of you who want to dive deeper into core mechanics, that is the place for you, and it also will support the channel so I can keep doing this. All right, now let's hit the stairs. The first thing that we're going to need to do going upstairs is get your lead foot onto the step. And here's where we're going to need to start changing the technique up and start engaging the glutes. What we're going to be doing is at some point approaching the step, and we have to place the lead leg in front of the stair. Now this could be a couple feet away from the stair, it could be very close to the stair, but what we need to do is make sure we arrest that forward movement so we are not simply running into the step. And here's where we're going to start engaging the glutes and using the hip in a slightly different manner. When we place the heel, instead of shifting forward by pulling from the hip flexors of the rear leg, my right leg, and then swinging through with the hip flexors of the standing leg, what we're going to do after the placement of the heel is we're going to shift the weight onto the front foot, and we're going to begin using the glutes of the rear leg to push back against the ground as we shift forward. And you'll notice that the body is going to begin to rise into this position instead of having a more bent or soft knee position, which happened when I flex the rear leg hip. So we're walking, we place, and then we push with the back leg as we tuck under with the lower abs to change the root. And now I'm slightly rising, and then I'm going to activate the front muscle of the hip, just like I did to do the swing through of the step before. But now what it's going to do is just bring me to a standing position where my swing leg is hovering right next to the standing leg, and it's this point where I can now flex the swing leg hip, and it's going to come up naturally and land with the heel on the step. We can practice this most easily by placing the heel right in front of the stair and begin the motion. So you're going to use the glutes on the rear leg to push back against the ground as you turn your upper waist forward on the left and tuck the pelvis on the left. That is the movement. We can rock back and forth and do that a few times. This is the preparation. Push back, keep tucked on the left, and keep forward on the left with your upper waist. That's the motion for preparation. Once you're here with the foot flat on the ground, that's where you're going to stand up, bringing you to this position, and then you're going to pull your swing leg up using your hip flexors to place on the step. So practice that all at once. 1, 2, 3. That's placing on the step. We can now back up a little bit and see what happens when we approach the step and place the foot a little farther away. We're going to use the same principle. Here, stand up, and then as I flex, it's going to bring the body forward as well as the swing leg. So depending on how far away from the step we are, it's going to get us toward the step. Now we don't want to be too far away because we don't want to have to overstretch to the step. So this is where we get used to doing this so many times that it just happens naturally. But when we're around here, that's where we're going to execute that movement. Then we can begin getting up onto the stair. So practice beginning with the foot right next to the step, Movement 1, stand up, place. Back up a little further. Movement 1, stand up, place. And you'll be able to gauge how far away your foot should be before you start doing that motion. Now, there is a possibility if you're too far away from the step, you can get more forward motion by doing a standard swing through like that, and then flex the hip and you will get up onto the stair without a problem. It's a little bit challenging to figure out when you're using one or the other, but it's something we'll get used to based on how far you are away from the step and just common experience. The farther away you are, the more distance you want to travel with the swing through before lifting your leg. The closer you are to the step, the more you want to begin the rise right here, getting to here and then here. So that is the first placement of the foot on the stair. Now we have to shift our weight onto the step and begin rising. And again, here's where we're going to be using the glutes, and we need to understand which leg is the one that's going to be pushing as we go. So as we place the heel, what happens for a lot of people is they begin to lean forward in order to get their center of gravity over the standing leg so they can push up, and they move up the stairs in that fashion. If we want to move up the stairs with proper posture and alignment, we don't want to do that. We have to continue using the rear leg glute as we move forward and up. So you can see that I'm pushing off the rear leg, not the forward leg at this point, to get myself to go forward, and the body should start to rise in that position. If I place my foot right here, I'm going to push off with the rear leg. I'm going to turn my upper waist forward, and then I'm going to tuck the pelvis under. When I tuck the pelvis under on the left, it's really placing all of my weight on the step. All I have on the ground is my toes pushing back with the glutes, but my root is on the step. Once the root is fully on the step and I've shifted forward and up, then I can start pushing up with the standing leg. So we're here, position 1. Position 2, I'm turning forward. Position 3, I'm tucking under. Now I'm ready to push up with the glutes of the standing leg. That pushes me up into the standing position. And then now I'm going to continue using the glutes of this standing leg, and I'm going to tuck the pelvis under to place the next foot. Here I want to make clear, when we do this placement, this is not just a flexion of my swing leg hip. If we just flex the swing leg hip, we're likely to run our toes into the step. We're continuing to use the glutes on the standing leg, and we're using the lower abs to flip the foot up onto the stair. Now we're going to turn to bring us up, still pushing off the rear leg. My root is already on the step, and now I can push up. Now let's explore the hip motions one phase of the movement at a time, and which hip is active. I stand up, that is my right hip. Flex to place, that's my left hip. Push forward and up, that's my right hip. Push up directly, left hip. Tuck under, it's still the left hip. Shift forward and up, still the left hip. Stand up, that's the right hip extension, and then that's the right hip flexion. In this final section of the video, we're going to be doing walking uphill. Walking uphill is another one of those situations where people are very prone to leaning forward and landing with a heavy heel strike and poor posture. In order to move up the hill with vertical posture and a very low heel impact, we need to use all elements of our core, waist rotation and hip power, and we have to use hip power correctly. So that involves using the proper muscles in the hip and using them at the right time. If we're going to begin, we can place the front leg forward on the heel. And then what we need to do is to get up against gravity, we do need to use the glutes to push the body forward and up, similar to walking upstairs. So we need to drive the rear leg back as we direct the waist muscles on the side of the standing leg, the forward leg. We need to direct those up the hill. So forward on the left from my upper waist. And then we need to root the upper leg with the lower abs by tucking under as I move. From this position, now this is different from walking upstairs. First, I need to pull the body up to a stand. That is going to be using the muscles in the front of the hip to pull the body up, similar to how I do the swing through on level ground. Once I get to the standing position, now I need to use the glutes to push back to move the body forward and up. So this is a great place to distinguish between hip flexion in the front and hip extension in the back. We have from this position, hip flexion from the front, hip extension from the back. If you try to use your glutes to extend, at this point, you're just going to push yourself backward because you don't have the leverage to move yourself forward. Your center of gravity is behind the standing leg. So at this point, we need to pull the body forward, then we can push the body forward. And then at this point, we need to engage the waist rotation to turn, to bring the heel down, just like we did on level ground, but we have extension of the rear leg hip in this situation. Then we need to tuck to shift the root to the new standing leg. Then we need to pull up from the hip flexors into the standing position and then push back with the hip extensors to move the body forward. And then we're going to change each element of the core in sequence to continue walking. I'll call that turn, tuck, lift, push. Turn, tuck, lift, push. That is the sequence of core movements to walk up the hill with proper posture. It's similar to walking on level ground except for the hip extension, and it's also one additional phase compared to walking on level ground. On level ground, there's 3 phases. On hills, there are 4 phases. You have the placement of the heel, that's 1. You have the change of the root, which is 2. You have the lift, which is 3. And then the push again, which is 4. And then from the push, we turn, we tuck, we lift, and push. Now let me do it all together so you can see what it looks like without pausing. The posture should stay vertical. We should have a very low impact on the heel because we're bringing the heel down with rotation, not by leaning forward. Rotation and proper hip power is how we create the movement. So there you have it. The use of the hips, front and the back, flexors and extensors with walking on level ground, walking upstairs, and walking uphill. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you're interested in going deeper into the use of the core for proper posture and walking, I suggest hopping over to the website and signing up for the Walking Code Tai Chi Code Bundle, where all of my information is available there. All my future information will be available there for $10 a month. That is a super great deal. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.